What does religious trauma and IVF have in common? Well, in this episode, you're about to find out. Dr. Quincee Gideon is a licensed psychologist who specializes in religious trauma and cult recovery. But she's not just any expert. She is on her own personal journey as well. Quincee shares her own unique journey of shedding even more layers of religious trauma as she unravels it from her IVF journey. From the basics of religious trauma to the painful undercurrent of God's timing when it comes to trying to conceive, we are diving deep into all of these experiences. Join us in this candid conversation as we explore the intersection of faith, trauma, and fertility. You're listening to the How We Get Through podcast, a place for you to feel connected through deep and meaningful conversations. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder and CEO of the How We Get Through app. My mission is to bring you affordable and diverse therapy resources to help you get through the hard stuff, all in one place and at your own pace. Welcome to the How We Get Through community. Hi, and welcome back to the How We Get Through podcast. Today we have a special guest. I'm so excited for this. Dr. Quincee Gideon. She is a licensed psychologist in California, and we are so excited to have you.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here, truly.
Yes. So Quincee and I kind of go way back. We worked together briefly at another place, we should say. And I just love how we both kind of found these paths of really advocating for ourselves and advocating for others in groups or in context, or in your case, what you're most known for is religious trauma, cult work, and all of that other stuff. Yep. So we're so excited to kind of dive deep into that. But before we went on to the podcast, we were talking about your sweet IVF journey.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right word, sweet.
Yeah. Well,
but
I feel like there's sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
it's always
the tenderness.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about also like how we're weaving that into religious trauma. And so every episode, we kind of like to start off with a mental health myth. And I'm wondering if you can kind of name what that is for you in terms of holding like religious trauma and this IVF journey.
There's lots of myths out there. I think, first of all, the first myth that we have to talk about is that there's a myth out there that religious institutions don't have a deep impact on our mental health. And I think the way that kind of plays into IVF is that as this, I've spent years in this space. I mean, deconstructing all kinds of crap that I learned in a really rigid group, a really high control group. And it wasn't until my IVF journey that I was really confronted with kind of a new part of the stuff that I hadn't unpacked yet. And how that has kind of played out for me is like all of the myths around fertility, like the things that I internalized that I didn't even know I had internalized, but I really needed to kind of address, like, you'll get pregnant when it's the right time. For me, it's actually, I'll get pregnant when I have enough money, I can pay for enough doctors, I have enough energy to like keep going through treatment. And it has nothing actually to do with anyone's timing. It's all about how much I'm willing to sacrifice financially. Right? So there's all of these ways in which I heard so many lessons about specifically God's blessing, God's goodness, God's timing, all of that stuff, when really it takes a whole lot more tenacity. It takes a whole lot more planning, financial planning. You have to really talk through a lot of really tough things with your partner. I mean, it's not just like this, for some people, it's not just this thing that happens.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there's like the tie, I keep thinking of like the Virgin Mary, like who was probably 14, in like real life, but even just that miracle of Jesus, which is interesting because I'm wondering if she actually was a virgin or not. But like, I just think of that is so much woven into miracle and life and all these other things. And I mean, I don't know if that's like the one piece that comes up for you, but it just feels like, oh, there's going to be this miracle. It's going to happen quickly and it's going to be unexpected and it's godly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's so godly.
Right. And not medically induced. Right. I think
Yes.
there's not much. There wasn't a shelf in my brain, I think, until going through this process to really categorize that so much of this stuff is medical for me and always will be because of something I was born with. Right. Like I was born with really bad endometriosis. I have a long family history of it, but my aunt had an epic case way back 40 years ago. And she had one of the first IVF babies in Texas. I mean, this was like miracle upon miracle. And the way that my family even talked about it was in that way instead of, no, she spent a lot of money in doctors' offices, a lot of time. And some doctors made a couple of really good guesses about what she needed as far as like hormone manipulation in order for there to be a successful pregnancy. It's just those two things aren't talking to one another, I don't think, especially in the religious trauma space. You know, I've been talking about this the last couple of weeks with clients, with survivors. I have a survivor group for religious trauma and cult survivors. And there's a lot of themes that come up and they kind of run the gamut. So like one theme is that, you know, this will happen on God's timing. And you need to just sort of like wait and be patient and pray and do a lot of spiritual practices as if the spiritual practices were going to somehow like be better than the medical practices. Instead of, even if you want to practice some spirituality, there's got to be some like overlap or talking between the two. There's even themes of like some women have been, you know, outright discouraged from going the medical route and have lost out on an opportunity for motherhood because their very religious and rigid groups, prevented them from taking those routes. So there's just lots of ways in which some really yucky stuff, I think, is hidden inside of fertility. A lot of these groups really expect women to only be fertile. Like, what else would they do with their lives if they're not that? And a lot of women specifically in these spaces, I think, have felt really lost and really uncared for.
Yes, I think what you're naming is that body shame, that reproductive shame of this is your one thing you're supposed to do. And also it will happen so easily. But if you don't want to do it, or if you have to do it this way, then it's not the same thing. Like you're excluded somehow.
So it's the main part of your life. It's the main purpose of your life according to their, quote, biblical teachings. But you're also excluded from it in some way if there's a problem. So spiritually, where do those people go? Where do they land? Where are they sort of homed in their spiritual practice? I think it's a tough place to be.
Yeah. And where has that kind of led you in your own spirituality from going through this? Because if there is, I mean, you've done a lot of deconstructing, but because to me, it almost feels like the need for, I don't know, more spirituality in a way that feels comforting and holding, not in the shaming way. But I would love for you to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things, I haven't talked about it a lot, but I'm like getting ready to, because I'm like, I've almost got a full thought process on it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talk about in our survivor group is magical thinking. In fact, the entire program is called A Year of Non-Magical Thinking, where I walk people through ways in which they can challenge some of those like magical thought processes that are introduced to us really, really young. And we don't actually understand how that is like deteriorating our mental health over time. So that's the entire premise of the program. So there's a whole month on magical thinking, and magical thinking can come up in a lot of different ways. It can be a logical fallacy. It can be a cognitive bias. It can be a lot of different things. But essentially, it is, if I think this result will happen. And it can go good or bad. So if I think this positive thought, I'll get pregnant. If I'm too worried that I'm not going to get pregnant, it will ruin the pregnancy. You see how magical thinking is like so deeply, deeply embedded in fertility. And this can happen in and outside of religious spaces. Like this is kind of common lore, right? So I think in this season, I have been so confronted with magical thinking on every front, from doctors, from acupuncturists, from nutritionists, from everyone, that it has been a little bit of a like, wait a minute, you're telling me if I don't think the right things, and by the way, what are the right things? But if I don't think those in some way, that I am sabotaging my fertility efforts, my outcomes. I mean, it's been just a really interesting space. And I don't think anyone feels as free to make those sort of statements, those magical thinking sort of statements, as they do in fertility.
Wow.
I mean, just strangers on the street, nurses in a doctor's office have said, it'll happen when you stop worrying about it.
Oh my God.
Structurally, no, it won't.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yes.
Nope. Biologically, no, it won't. Thank you so much. Right? It's like this weird thing. And some of these people have actually been super helpful in their particular practices. Like, I go to a massage therapist and she does like perinatal and medical massages. Weirdest chick I know. I'm talking
I love
weird,
it.
Right? And there's like all kinds of things that she says that I just have to be like, I'm in outer space. I'm not taking it in. That is the qualitatively untrue. No, thank you. I don't need your interpretation about how my ankle injury has also, contributed to my infertility. This was happening years before. Like, no, thank you. I don't need that. But she's also really good at her craft. So there's been these like really weird spaces where sometimes I feel like I have to subject myself. And I think a lot of women in this space feel like they have to subject themselves to things that make them very uncomfortable because there is a skill in that practitioner that they need. My acupuncturist is the same. She like specializes in fertility, but I'm telling you, on the first time that I saw her, after so many HIPAA violations, right? She's like talking about all of these people's cases, and I'm going, oh my God, please do not talk about my uterus to anyone. Like, this is no thank you. But so after all of that, she was like, the people that get pregnant in my practice are the ones that journal in blue ink every day and send me a picture of their journal prompts. You want me to text you a picture of my journal? And it has to be in blue ink? Like, weird. But she also like does a really great job in acupuncture. So it's a tough space to live in.
I mean, I feel like you're talking about two parts. Like, number one, just acknowledging and holding space for your grief, for your hardship, for your path, for the difficulty, and not trying to sprinkle in these things that, if you do this one thing, then all of this hardship goes away. Because you can't guarantee that. You can't say that. And that's what I think feels like that miss is like, I actually don't want to hear that.
Right.
Like, that's not helpful for me. It doesn't feel true for me. And so I think there's that misattunement there, yet you need to attune to their specialty.
Right.
Which is the tricky part.
Right. That's what I have to like tolerate, swallow. Like, I just have to like live in a space of things that I wouldn't normally tolerate, right? In order to get this outcome.
Yeah. And I'm wondering for you, in your history, in your past, I'd love for you to kind of talk about your own religious trauma or religious background. But I didn't really grow up in a religious home, so I don't have nearly the same experiences. But I'm wondering for you, it just feels like you talked about, like this another like shanking on the side of like, you want me to believe in this like weird thing, and I just spent years deconstructing or thinking that I had to believe in these weird things to get something. Like,
I think part of most people's religious trauma recovery is realizing that a lot of us were subjected to things that we did not consent to and that we didn't want to be a part of. We didn't want to learn those lessons. We didn't want to think about God as like mean and spiteful and vengeful and, hell-bent on sending people to the pits of hell. Like, most of us wouldn't have chosen that if we were given an opportunity. And we have to deconstruct that despite not having a choice, we internalized a lot of lessons that were detrimental to us, and, to sort of make sense of that in some way. And I think that part of fertility is putting me back in a position where I don't feel like there's true consent. Not really.
Yes.
Right? Because true consent would be like, could you not ask me to journal?
Yeah.
And I could say that, but when you're having to say it on every single front, there's just something about it that's quite exhausting. And so I think you just sort of submit yourself to like, this is a season, this is the process, which most of us actually felt for most of our childhoods as religious trauma survivors. Like, this doesn't make sense. This is super uncomfortable. I don't like any part of it, but I do have to live in it. I do have to like survive it in some way. So it's a bit like revisiting, some old patterns, especially around space and who you have to come in contact with. I mean, one of the freeing things about addressing your religious trauma is deciding who you want to have a relationship with, right? And you don't necessarily get a lot of that in the fertility journey. You go to the doctor that will have the highest success rate. It doesn't matter if they have super terrible bedside manner. Like you go to the acupuncturist that's like in your town that specializes in fertility because she's had amazing success rates, and you don't want to drive across Los Angeles to go to someone else that probably wouldn't want you to journal and text you personally asking for your journal prompts that morning. Like it's right. There's just lots of ways in which you are just choosing almost like the lesser of evils.
I just keep thinking about like the lack of care for women, like being forced into things that aren't actually supporting them. And I think about like religious purity culture, and I think about the fertility space, and we're not taking care of them in all parts.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about purity culture, because one of the big sells in purity culture is that we won't ruin ourselves. We won't be diseased, and we won't be ruined like a used tissue that everyone has used. And then we find our partners and we're like a used tissue that's no longer like fun or good to our partner. But really, I think the undercurrent of the cell there is that we will be fertile and good mothers, and we will not have invited some untoward issue into our life, whether that's emotional or physical or medical, that we won't have participated in things that would ruin our fertility. And then you get to a place to where you followed all the rules burned you really bad. They got you in a really bad marriage. You leave that marriage. It takes you a while to find your partner. You've got endometriosis that you were born with and you were diagnosed when you were 16. And you've been riding that pony for over 20 years, just trying to keep it. And then you're like, rounding the corner on your late 30s, and you're like, it's now or never. And you're put in it's like a timed event. Like, quick, we got to get to this finish line because we're running out of time. Yeah, purity culture did not save me from any of this, but that's the cell.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And do you feel like it's like with consent and purity culture, like what feels the heaviest for you right now to unpack? What feels like the most like in your face?
I mean, the potential for more loss, I think. Yeah, that it's like not over yet.
Yeah. And holding space for that.
Yeah, I think it's helpful for people to know that for someone that's struggling with fertility, they just never know when the next loss is going to happen. Like, I think I'll have to be like holding a baby in my arms before I'm like,
yep.
Did we get through it?
Absolutely.
Did we get all the way through it? I could be 36 weeks pregnant and be like, are we going to get there?
Yeah.
There's
very real.
Loss is really huge. And there's no time to deal with it because you're in a timed race against age and menopause and diminished return in egg retrievals. There's all kinds of things.
Yeah. And there is a biological piece to that, but I think they've changed it from geriatric pregnancy to advanced maternal age. It's like, okay, that helps a little bit. But again, I don't know. None of it feels good. None of it feels for you. None of it feels like surrounding you. None of it feels like worshiping you, in all of your like goodness and glory and feminine and womanhood and all the things, no matter what the path has been. Sorry, I'm like in my deep divine feminine journey. I got a like see-through shirt on, but I got something underneath. But I'm just like,
no, I mean, I think
sensuality,
I think it's loud in this space. I think it's like the misses, the ways in which we maybe could do this better, but don't. And I do think that, we talk about this in a lot of spaces where maybe the missed or the oppressed or a group of people that is not being seen are like, I don't want to do the emotional labor of like you getting on board with like seeing me as a human. I feel that very deeply in this fertility journey. Like, it's so exhausting, and there's so much religious trauma coming up, and you're batting away like terrible responses from people. Like, you must really want this. Yeah, like
No.
That doesn't actually feel great. I don't know what you want me to say to that. Yes, I do, but I also feel like you're judging me a little bit for like wanting this. I don't know. There's a lot. You're batting all of that away, and so by the end of it, whenever there's questions like, so what would you need? A drink of water and a nap? I don't know.
Exactly.
I don't have any ideas because I'm, pumped full of hormones, and my body is like on a journey for sure. And I'm, grieving the last loss and getting ready for the next, if that comes. I mean, it's just too much.
Yeah.
It's just too much.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the same journey, but I did miscarry our first at like 10 weeks, I think, but it was like a miscarriage. It's a whole thing. But I remember this similar feeling of the yearning. Like, nothing is going to soothe the yearning for this baby. Like, until that baby is in your arms, there is nothing. There's no positive news. Even if you're pregnant, the same thing is like, until that baby is out and we are cool and whatever, the yearning for is like the depths of your soul. And I mean, again, we're in two different journeys in that, so I want to honor your own. And so I don't know what that obviously is like for you, but I feel like I connect with you on that piece that it doesn't fucking go away.
And you know what? I wish people would talk more about that. I wish men, women, parents, I wish people would talk more about their yearning, because it makes people like me going through fertility treatments a little less weird. You know what I'm saying? Like, if men were talking openly and honestly about how much they yearned for a baby, my partner desperately wants this child, like desperately. I don't think he's going to work and talking to all of his colleagues about it. He's not going on podcasts, certainly, and talking about the fertility journey. I am. Right. And so there's something like, I wish we had more space, or people just made more space to talk about their yearning, because it would, I think, make people like me feel less weird. And maybe there'd be less feedback like, you must really want this, right? Is that a bad thing?
Yeah, and I don't know, I haven't talked to, obviously, my husband about that piece, but I like that women might be talking about it more, but it is non-binary in some ways, right? Like, it's not gender specific. I think it hits women in a different way. There's different layers there, but that like yearning for something that you were told happens the first time you ever have sex, and it just like, here it is. Like, it just is magical and it happens. And then when it doesn't and it's so hard, you're like, what is happening? What is wrong with me? And nothing is going to cease that yearning until that baby's here. And it's black and white, you know?
Yeah, I do think that there's, I'm kind of wondering, I haven't quite gotten to the bottom of why that specific feedback has been like, so confronting. They're like, you must really want this. But I think it's almost the insinuation that I've lost the plot somehow. And that I, am like, I don't know, pushing things past the limit as if there is some, like divine limit. Like there's a line in the sand.
That's it.
And you're not supposed to like push it past this.
Push that hard.
This, mark, especially medically, because then you've like really lost the plot. I don't know. There's just some insinuation in it. And I really think what at least some people are trying to say is I can see what you've put yourself through to do this. And I think it would just be okay to say that. Or you're already a mother because you're fighting so hard for your child, right? Like, yeah, anything like that would be better than this insinuation that there was some like limit and I've overstepped it somehow. And so like, I don't know. I'm like pushing something that's not like not supposed to be pushed.
Yeah. I mean, I think it ties right back to that religious piece, the magical piece about having kids. Like it's just like, it's a godly thing. It's a, it's a soul thing. It's a whatever thing. And so if you're going outside of that, then there must be something wrong or whatever.
Right.
And
right. Like it must not be meant like, for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's where like the work of like reconnecting to yourself so much, to that yearning again, to that, I wasn't going to say faith, but I think the belief that you are a mother, the belief that you want a child and you will have a child, like, and maybe it's not will have the child, but that you're going to keep going because of the yearning, because of the belief around it, because of who you are, not this external thing. And so every obstacle, you're like, okay, here's another obstacle. Let's go for it. And I just like that perseverance is fucking exhausting and it's terrifying, and you're doing it. You've been doing it. And so like, I know it's hard to stop and like say great job or like look how far you've come, but I just kind of want to honor that for you. Like, look how far you've come to be here right now. And you did that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I say this in like the least narcissistic way that I can muster, but I'm the strongest person I know, and only because of this. Like I've got a record of it. I've got medical bills that prove it. I've got, like there's, I've got a timeline that proves it. We have to travel for our IVF doctor because he specializes in what I have as deep tissue endometriosis and adenomyosis, which is usually like a non-starter for folks. But I was just recently diagnosed with the second one. So we've had this like whole journey, and thank God I have a doctor that's like, I deal with that all the time. No big deal. But we had to travel to find him. So
where's he at? Texas?
Mexico City.
Mexico City.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess I got lucky because I had a gynecologist that I really liked, that helped me with a lot of my endo. And then when we started trying to have a baby, and he was like, listen, you've got endo, like, let's just go ahead and get you into a fertility doctor here. I went to that doctor, and she was like, you've got really bad endo. Let's go ahead and like think about, what some of our options would be. We got those quotes, and it was like $100,000.
Oh my gosh.
Cash. I was like, I don't have a credit card that has that high.
No.
So it was, sort of like, what are we going to do? So I went back to that doctor. And I was like, we could maybe do that over the course of like 10 years, of like, but I'm on a timeline here, with my, in my late 30s, like I need some help here. And he was like, listen, this is weird, but a lot of my patients have done this, but he went to Johns Hopkins and for medical school. And he was like, I had a lot of colleagues that came from all over the world, and they came there to get like such specialized training and then to go back to their home countries. And so he gave me a couple of names, and I looked up one of them was in Mexico City, and he was like, he's the guy to go to in Latin America for endometriosis, and then had like a colleague that specializes in like treating the worst cases of endo. Goes in front of the Mexican Senate once a week and like advocates for women. So I was like, no, this actually sounds like what I should do. Is obviously a fraction of the cost. Is still expensive. Narrator.
Yes.
It is still expensive, but it was like so much more doable. And, then I got the very interesting and harrowing experience of negotiating my medical needs in Spanish. And the doctors speak English, but none of the other medical staff do. So it's been like, lots of twists and turns and lots of like, I thought she told me to do this. And the doctor was like, maybe that was a bad translation. I need you to do this. There's just been lots of little things that have to be kind of negotiated in an already pretty anxiety provoking experience. So that's definitely added to it. I'm glad it's accessible to us. It's what we, we're able to do. We would not be able to do this otherwise. But it's definitely had some extra twists and turns to it because of that. They've also saved my life. That the one doctor found like a softball sized growth that had to be removed and reconstructed my uterus, and all of that was like very fast, and surgery within a week and all of this good stuff. So it's been a lovely experience. It's also had its own twists and turns, which is the fertility journey. I don't think anyone's as straightforward.
And I think when you're talking to, it's like there has to be a certain amount of privilege to afford
totally
this whole journey too, and how devastating that is. And that in all the things that happens in your relationship, all the pain points there, all the financial burdens in your relationship. And so how has your relationship been throughout this journey as well?
I say this with humility, but I feel like I've got the best guy ever. And our relationship actually, we don't go up and down a lot around sort of the external stuff. I think our major pain points in our relationship have been sort of blending our families. He has children from a previous relationship, and they have like a very specific life that they were living before I came in. And it was the negotiation of that, like, where do I fit in? When do I move? When do they have to be sort of flexible? That sort of thing has been the negotiation. The stuff around the fertility has never been a question. In fact, I felt like my desire to be a mother really solidified when I became a stepmom. And because, for anyone out there, I do not care how close you are to those kids. You're never, ever, ever going to be their mom. You're their stepmom. You're their, and that's okay. That is such a precious and specific space that you get to occupy that no one else in the world gets to. It's really, really such a privilege, but you're not their mother, and you never will be. And there's something really like important about getting on board with that, I think, for anyone that's in, the sort of step parenting role. But I think what it did for me was kind of put me in this like, oh my gosh, I long for that, and I will never have that here. And so it felt like it got clear for me, like, okay, this is something I really want. And I've always known that I've really wanted it, but like life threw a lot of lemons. There was like a really ugly divorce and grad school and trying to live in LA. There was just a lot of little sort of steps along the way. So it helped me get very clear that I wanted to be a mom, and also sort of negotiating that space where you're someone's stepmom, which is very, very different that our relationship is mostly around those things. Like, how do we negotiate those things well? I think my partner really appreciates his co-parent, but I think he wants me to step into more of a mothering role. And it's just not fair for the kids. So we're kind of in a space of like trying to negotiate that stuff. That's where things have been, I wouldn't even say tricky, but definitely like more, we take more time trying to figure out like the nuances.
Transitional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that acceptance piece about being a step parent. I have many step parents. Well, no, maybe just 2.5, one left. And I feel very similar. It's like you're an added bonus here, but there's not a taking away or ownership. And I think both of them kind of did that very well. Because it is tricky. And those kids, they're older, right?
Older.
Your kids,
Mm-hmm.
stepkids,
Mm-hmm.
like college age.
One is in college, and then 2 are still in high school and middle school.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I missed so much of their lives. Like, I came around 4.5 years ago. So I didn't get to do any of their little stuff, like any of their school stuff. I remember like not being able to go to the youngest, like last performance thing in 5th grade. And I'd only been to like 1 before, and I could not figure out why I was so upset. And finally, I got to the place of like, because I missed all of the other kids and most of his stuff. And I don't know if I'm going to get it myself. Like we were kind of in the thick of our struggle. So, there's just lots of like little like, longing, right? The yearning, the longing. Like I want, to be a part of things like that. And just by function of when our relationship started, I just like missed so much of their childhoods.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And in your previous marriage, was there, I don't even think you're ready for kids, I assume, at that point. Were you trying to conceive, or you're trying to survive that relationship?
I was trying to survive that relationship. This might be another podcast. We can talk about this another time. I've actually had someone approach me about writing about this, but he was not straight. And I did not know that until we were in the relationship, and that ended up being, something that he came to later, and I obviously came to realize a little bit later. And so there was like no conversation around family because we were just trying to survive what it was like for him to be closeted and really feel trapped in something. But we were both a part of a really traumatizing religion that did not give him freedom to be who he was, and it didn't give me freedom to leave. And so there was like a lot of really complicated dynamics that came up from that. But yeah, family was, I think, a part of what we both talked about wanting, before we got married. But then
as you do.
Right. But then the actuality of being married, I think, was quite confronting to him, which I don't think anyone would blame. Right. You're like now confronted with like some significant role changes.
Right.
And that had to be pretty awful for him. I really have a lot of compassion for what that was like for him. He was mean as a bear about it, which is where I lose my compassion. But, I don't envy the space that he was in, certainly.
Yeah. Did he come out to you first? Like you were the first and only?
I discovered.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of betrayal, I would imagine.
Big betrayal. After lots and lots of messages that I was the problem, or I was too much, or I needed too much, there was this discovery. And I think, there was that relief of like, oh, this all makes sense. And then there was the second wave of feelings that come, which is like the betrayal and the like, how did I get here? And what do I do to help myself? It was significant in its trauma, certainly. And the way that it brought up every gross underbelly to my own fundamental religious experience was sort of laid bare in that marriage, because I had to decide how I felt about divorce in order to get one. And I had to decide how, I was going to advocate for the LGBTQ community, because I was now married to someone. And, previously I had been an advocate, but I was a religious advocate, and that is different. And I had to get like really, really clear on where I stood on a lot of things. So yeah, it was a season.
What started your deconstruction there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had just started my doctoral program, which I think, there was like tricky thing. It was at a seminary. So I got like called in front of the provost because I was getting a divorce and breaking the community standards. And so instead of feeling like someone was seeing me and holding me and like, hey, we have heard that you are unhoused and don't have anywhere to go. Instead of doing that, which was very true at the time, I got called in front of a bunch of people that were threatening to like, kick me out as a student because I was getting a divorce, instead of like, are you okay? Have you eaten?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so funny. I mean, obviously it's a painful experience, but I get this kind of like flash of you like holding up a flag in like this like armor. Like, I'm sorry, this is gonna sound so weird, but the what was happening for you at that time and who you are now. And I think obviously it may feel a little bit different when you're in it, but I think again, you are the strongest person you know. That was one of the pieces there.
For sure. Yeah.
One of the pieces.
Totally.
And like, thank you for that.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
And I'm sorry that happened.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But it's also interesting to think that I was like probably on the tail end of that when I met you.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we worked at a religious, or I don't know what that was.
Yeah. But I think I was probably 2 years post-divorce.
Yeah.
When I met you. So it was like, I was still very much in the deconstruction, trying to figure out what had happened. The other thing that I think contributed to my religious trauma specialty was that at some point, Fuller, the school that we went to, started referring pastors to me in order to get cleared, in order to go back to their churches because they were behaving in some way that Fuller felt was problematic in order to put them in leadership in a church. And that wasn't a bad assessment on their part. So I started sort of taking in a bunch of folks that were so traumatized by the very faith communities in which they were going back to lead, and then were going to perpetuate trauma over and over and over again.
Interesting.
So there was something about that coupled with my own experience that just made it intolerable to keep saying like, I think most churches are warm and good. They have good intention. Like that completely broke down. I think actually the exception to the rule is that there's like churches that can behave healthily. But if they are healthy, they actually have to get rid of a whole lot of the theology that their conventions make them believe in. Right. So you can't be a misogynist and be a healthy space. So I don't, what are you going to do about that Southern Baptist Convention? What are you going to do about that? In the Four Squares Convention. Like there's so many conventions that, churches kind of hide under in order to like have their bylaws or whatever. And I think in order for churches to be really healthy, they're going to actually have to break most of the rules of those conventions. And so that's when it got really heavy for me, that actually most churches are not able to be healthy. And if they are healthy, they're the exception to the rule.
Wow. Yes. My heart is actually beating really fast because the church that we were a part of, I don't know if you've heard, but the main pastor has come out. Well, he hasn't come out. The board has, whatever, that there was some inappropriate text with somebody he was counseling or a couple he was counseling. I'm not sure. And then, he's on leave for whatever that means. And more women are coming forward. I mean, it's not just one text around that, but it doesn't impact us in the same way. And I think my husband and I like never really fully like believed, but I did get kind of sucked in there. The ripple effect that it has, like, is immeasurable, like for his own family, for his children, for the congregation, and everybody who has known him or not, or worked with him. Like that, I think that feels like the most damaging piece of like, when you build something on one man, on one person, that's never good. That's never.
And then you also have to think about the theology of restriction, all of the ways in which the church theology is actually based on a completely different version of humanity than we've been able to like actually achieve, right?
Yeah.
And
or
so,
are.
Yeah. So if there's like no space to be human or to have feelings or to express those feelings, all of which are oftentimes told to us from a pulpit that are wrong, right? Like those categorically are wrong. Those are evidence of your sin. You have a feeling, you're angry, that's sinful. You haven't quite submitted to God, or you haven't given all of your feelings over. Like there's all kinds of ways in which the very premise of a lot of these rigid religious experiences are telling us not to be human, like go against every part of your biological like desire. And that's when things get really toxic. So there was a version of this playing out where he sent like one inappropriate text 10 years ago, and there was like healthy conversation around it. And there was like, you know what? And no one person needs to be the leader. Like, let's start a rotation here. You need probably 3 weeks off every month in order to like, I don't know, get your shit together. Like any version of that, I think like there was a version of that. But if no one can talk about it, and if the same people are behaving in ways that they then preach against on Sunday, then that is a toxic combination.
And the lack of accountability. And I think even like some people obviously being really upset, and some people like, I don't believe this, or this, you know, like you're still my pastor, whatever the things is, like, it's just, it becomes less about your own spirituality and your own path, and it becomes about this one person to lead you. And I think even when you talk about cults, which is just, I think everyone's so fascinated by it, but that's the piece where they tell you to turn off. Like I listen a little bit culty, that podcast, the NXIVM, but that gut feeling they tell you don't listen to.
Right.
That
but it
intuition
happens
feeling.
In almost every church in America. So how are we going to distinguish against, between cults and the church around the corner when, cults maybe turn up the intensity really quickly, and maybe they have you sign over their assets, but a lot of churches do too. And, like, how are we going to distinguish between the two when the churches around the corner that we're all like going hard in the paint to defend, when they're doing some of the same things that we would wag our fingers at if we saw it in another group and they didn't believe in God, they had some other spiritual practice, we'd be like, oh my God, you have to give how much of your income every month? Which evangelical church, which Mormon church in any of your communities does not demand 10% of their followers' like income? So actually the same things are happening in our churches that are happening in cults, including the message of like, turn off your like instinct, turn off your feelings, turn off your discomfort, because actually the godly way is going to be full of discomfort. Just think of all the sermons you've heard that say that. Yeah.
Yes,
it'll be full of it. You are a warrior, right? They use a lot of military language. You are a warrior. You have to be ready to fight. And this time on earth should be full of suffering and hardship. And that's how you'll know that you're following the righteous path.
Yeah. And you'll get the reward in the end.
You'll get the reward. And for some people, that's fertility. For other people, that's like heaven. They're content to suffer the rest of their life. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that kind of conveniently, there's some assignment of like, and this is what the reward will be. You'll be blessed with children. You'll be blessed with this beautiful marriage if you stay pure and you suffer through all those relationships and never have any sexual contact with anyone. And then you'll be blessed with the perfect marriage. And then what? I did that.
Yeah.
How'd that work out for me?
Exactly. I feel like there's that internalized like gift of whatever that is for that unique person, that's what they can kind of use against. And then there's that belief, well, I didn't get the baby, so I must be bad, and trying to unpack that. I didn't get the perfect marriage, or I'm still lonely, or this career, or I feel lost in these things. I didn't sacrifice enough to get this reward. Okay, so I love this. I feel like I remember meeting you, and you obviously still have this, but I'm like, I just love our conversation because like I want to know everything about your life, and I think you should write a book. But I was just like, Quincee is just the most beautiful person I have ever seen in my life. You. She has her shit together. She's the only fucking sane person in this place, and I just want to be in her like sphere. Like that's just what I felt. But
could not I was just a little you enough for that.
Yeah. I didn't know who I was, you know, but I remember feeling that in that space, I could grab onto you if I needed to.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you still provide that for so many other people.
Thank you.
Again, like, I think when we were first talking, I was like, I fangirl about you all the time. And, you know, I can't believe you're here with me. But I again, like, everything that you've gone through, it's like it's you wear it, but you like wear it so well in this grounding. I'm just trying to hard to explain it, but like there's a knowing of you, and so there's a knowing of me. That's how I feel when I'm around you, and just the things that you dig deep in and you unearth, and the bravery and the wisdom that you've always had. Like, I mean, this is just like half your life. You're going to keep freaking going on this, you know, but I just want to thank you again for showing up here, showing up every day, showing up, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago, in those like small moments. And I'm excited for what's to come for you.
Thank you.
Whatever that looks like.
Thank you.
And I would love for you to just, as we kind of wrap this up, what are like maybe a couple things or one thing you want people, if they're like kind of struggling with either infertility and religious trauma, what do you want them to know, or what's something they can do to kind of work through that today? It's a big question, but
I think when it comes to religious trauma, I think the primary feeling that people feel when they like start to kind of talk about these things or worry about these things, like, have I maybe been on the wrong path? Or like, oh, you're not supposed to feel so terrible in your church setting. Like, you're not supposed to hate yourself. That's weird. Huh. When people start to feel that way, their first response is typically overwhelm. And it's so much overwhelm that they have a hard time approaching like the tenderness, the subject matter, I don't know, what do I think about this? Or even the feelings of being betrayed, like being dragged into something that they didn't get to choose, or you promised me this and then I had this terrible outcome, right? Like whatever the feeling is, it's typically overwhelm and it shuts people down. So my number one thing that I want people to do is, number one, provide some education, like allow yourself some education, slow drip style. This is why in my survivor group, I do all year long. And the reason I do that is because you just get little tidbits along the way. Take it in, take deep breaths around it, let yourself kind of regulate around that, and then we can move on to the next kind of subject matter. So I think that education, just allowing yourself to have some new information come in while managing your overwhelm, is really, really important. And the next thing that I suggest that people do is really work on nervous system regulation. Because just think about what some of our churches or some of our cult groups did. They got us real amped up about some fear, some terrible ending, some way in which we were going to fail God and we were going to lose relationship, you know, some way we were going to lose community. And it worked based on that amped up space. And your healing, the most liberating thing that you can do to say a big fuck you to all of that religious trauma is to regulate that nervous system. And that happens slowly and over time. And different days it looks like different things. So like today, regulating my nervous system was like a weirdo standing on my driveway just letting the sun sort of hit my face for like a few seconds. Now, all of my neighbors think I'm the weirdest person on the block, and I accept it. But I also make better cookies than anyone else, and I just make them cookies whenever they look at me weird. You know, like it's you just gotta like own some of this stuff. But there's lots and lots of ways that you can regulate your nervous system that are completely free, and you don't need to like get like expensive things in order to do that. You could start doing that today. So I think that those are like really helpful things when someone is coming out of their religious trauma. And probably not surprisingly, when someone is in a fertility journey, guess what the two experiences are? A dysregulated nervous system state because you're expecting the next loss, and overwhelm because so much information is coming at you. And you're having to really rethink like, okay, so this is not what I learned in sex ed. Yes. But it's really actually a freaking miracle.
Complicated.
There's like 2 days a month that a woman can get pregnant. So all of these like surprise pregnancies that happen, like actually statistically, we can't wrap our minds around how those are happening. It truly is like miraculous, just statistically. But that's a lot of information that's coming in. What's wrong with you, what your blood levels need to look like, what this needs to look like, what the next step is, what the next step in 6 months is, what medication you need to start now so it gets you ready for the next one, like overwhelm. So I think actually my advice is the same on both of those. Like small drips of information to manage your overwhelm and regulate that nervous system.
Yeah. Which I think like regulating your nervous system is the medicine for life.
Yeah,
for anything. Agree. And we've come so far away from it.
Yes.
That it feels weird when we're in the sunlight, but actually that's like our natural rhythm. Right?
Yeah. When I think about my grandparents who were like probably in their heyday in the 50s and 60s, they had a garden in their backyard. They were planting most of their food. They had a hard stop on work at usually 4:30. My grandfather like rode his bike to and from work because why waste gas when you can just ride your bike in a small little town, you know? They lived close to a lake and everyone jumped in the lake every night. Didn't matter like what time of year it was. It was like cannonballs off the dock at the end of the driveway. It was, when I think about that stuff, that's exactly what I'm recommending to so many of my clients. Get your hands in the dirt, be in the sunshine for a little bit, like rhythm, boundaries, limits. Are you like slow making meals at least once a week, like with all the ingredients? Try that. Just try that.
Taste. Experience.
One of the things that a recent client of mine told me was so helpful is she just bought a like a very simple recipe book, but a physical one that's like in her
what's
kitchen.
That?
I know, who knew? And she's like, next page, next week, I'm going to make this. And so she plans her Thursday nights around making this elaborate meal for herself. And it's not really that elaborate, but it's more elaborate than she's used to, right?
Yeah.
And the step-by-step and the cutting the tomatoes and the, so she puts the date in the cookbook of like when she made it and she like rates it. Like, wow, two stars, not my best work. Should have done more of this, right? And so it's like she's documenting her life in the ways that she's actively regulating herself.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, again, it's like returning to the natural rhythms that we have, but we have to work harder or more intentional, maybe I should say, to do that. But it's abundant around us, and we forget that a lot.
I also think that people need to winter.
So if
like
rest.
So if we think about like the seasons of the year, humans did best when they were like really, resting and fattening up a little bit in the winter and then getting really active when the sun is out longer. And so maybe this is an invitation for anyone in this season to just like allow yourself the next 2 months to do less and slow down and just see if your nervous system does better in that way. And by the way, that doesn't mean you have to stop moving. You just walk slower.
Right.
Right. Or like you do something else like in a garden. Maybe just a weekend is like, I'm going to plant some tomatoes and just see how that goes in the corner over here. That's it. That's all I'm doing.
Yes. Yeah. That's actually currently that's where I'm at now. is, I mean, I think I freaking bruised my groin on the Peloton. Like, no joke. I'm like in so much pain. But all I want to do is like a slow flow yoga. And what I have to really fight against, there's so many layers here, but like productivity. I'm like, no, I don't want to do anything. I'm just going to journal and I'm going to sit here in the sun. And then also I think what my body should look like or how it should perform and all these things. And so really sitting with that, still being in touch with my body, still moving my body, still being a part of nature, and having to fight against productivity and what my body should look like. And it's hard, but it also is like there's so much peace in the slowness when you can get there and like kind of keep returning there.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to put like a calendar date on it. Like you could just say, actually, I'm not going to try to change my body for the next 6 weeks, which means that it's this date. I'm not going to do a single thing other than what I feel like doing. And if that's laying on the yoga mat and like doing nothing else but journaling or whatever, great. If that's like very slow movement because that's what you feel, but you're not trying to change your arms. Your arms are perfect and they help you do that, downward dog. So like just let your arms be, and then putting it on the calendar, like we'll assess at this date how I'm feeling.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Right now.
We all have it. Yeah. We all have to do things like that, especially in this world that's like pushing for too much.
Listen. Amen, sister. Can I say that? Quincee, okay, where can people find you? How can we do non-magical thinking?
Yes.
Tell us everything.
I spend most of my time online on Instagram, and I'm at Dr. Quincee with 2 E's at the end, just to make it extra confusing for everyone. And then for a year of non-magical thinking, you can find all the links there at Dr. Quincee. But it's called A Year of Non-Magical Thinking for Survivors. And it's under the sort of education and coaching platform that we have called Traumastry. So like monastery.
Beautiful.
But for trauma. See how we did that there?
So good. Yes.
It's under Traumastry, and you can find every free resource that we have there. We have a lot of like book lists and supportive things that you can get in that space just to kind of see how I work and see if it's a good fit. I mean, I am inviting cult survivors into a space, and that's really scary for some people to like come and join another group, after they've gotten out of a really toxic one. So this one is like low pressure. You come when you want, you leave when you want, take 6 months off, come back, like no judgment, no questions asked. We just like want you to be exactly where you need to be. And you can be as anonymous as you need to be. So I'll just sort of say this for the people out there that are in really high control groups. They don't always feel like they're ready to leave yet, but they're trying to prepare themselves. And I would say that I am so proud of you. And that is definitely what I recommend for most people. Don't leave yet. Spend the next 6 months getting ready for that. And we talk a lot about that in the survivor group. So you can come as anonymously as you'd like.
I love that.
Yeah.
Is it ongoing? Like you can enroll whenever?
Anytime. Yes.
Beautiful.
We are trying to make a non-culty corner of the internet, which is low pressure. You can come and go however you want, and it's ongoing registration. I do have a couple of courses that I like open up once a year, and the only reason I don't have them open all the time is because I can't keep up with some of the things that we offer. So for instance, I have like a nervous system regulation course, and I offer coaching in that, and I just can't keep up with it year round. So we open that typically every like end of summer, beginning of fall, when everyone's getting back into school and they're like, what?
Yeah.
I need help.
What's happening?
But I'll mention too that we do have an attachment. Our major seller attachment course is coming out in February. We'll open that again. And that can be really helpful, especially in religious trauma. When attachment was taught to you as like a bad thing, you should only be attached to God, but actually you were missing out on like really helpful caregiver relationships that could have regulated you a little bit more. And now you're like dating people and like you hate everyone and you don't want them to come close, but you don't want them to leave either. Yeah. Big time for religious trauma survivors. So we have that coming out in February.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Quincee, for the spaces you create and the healing that you help others with. So thank you so much for sharing your story and being on here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to our show. We know that talking about religious trauma or infertility can bring up a lot. So in the show notes, we have resources for you to continue to get the support you need. You've got this, and we've got you. We'll see you next time.